Welcome to The Bird Who Made Me Happy. This is Alicia Bridge, and I am your host. We're going to dive into the topic of what is it about birdsongs that makes us so happy.
You had a daughter and you brought her home.
When I think about why I first became intrigued about birdsongs, I can honestly say it might have been the stress of motherhood and the need to find some calm amongst everything. It could have also been my worry about the pandemic. Either way, I was on the search for answers for how to cope with the stress I was experiencing. And then one day, on a drive, I heard a bird song. And it changed me.
The times are different now.
My next guest is Terence Miranda. Terence is a doctor of audiology at Residence Hearing Clinic in the Cowichan Valley. He has a keen understanding as to what it is about birdsongs that might be incredibly important when we consider preserving our hearing and happiness. Thank you, Terence, so much for doing this with me. I really am grateful for the time and the knowledge that you're going to share. So I'm always curious about the roots in a person's life and where one's motivation kind of starts. And I think what's unique in having come to your office and sort of knowing a little bit about you is that you are interested in birds. There is this unique kind of love that comes out even as I come into your office. And I'm wondering, where did that first intrigue into birds or into nature kind of start for you?
Well, come to think of it, actually, as a child, I had always wanted a cat and a dog as a pet. And my mom, who had 3 kids and a job and worked really hard, said to us, "Well, I'm already taking care of you guys. I can't take care of a dog and a cat as well." So we got birds instead. We actually got budgies. And these budgies, we named them Pete and Tweet. And I only think about that right now. I'd forgotten all about them. I don't think that was any reason that I went into audiology, but that probably was the first introduction of bird songs into our house. You know, the Tweet and the songs of those budgies are part of my childhood memories. But in terms of bird songs, I feel the best personally when I am out in nature doing physical things. So when I'm out in nature, there's so many things that make me feel good. It could be the view, it could be the smells, and for sure, part of it is what things sound like in nature. When I came across this article on birdsongs, I felt like it was really good material for relaying to the public the importance of hearing birds in terms of our overall health and happiness.
Yeah, okay, so let's go there. You wrote an article that I read and kind of became so intrigued with who is this person that also loves birds. Because you wrote an article about bird songs and quality of life. And can you summarize that for those of us that didn't get to read it and maybe share a little bit about this article that got you there?
Yeah, sure. There's a study done out of Europe, out of Germany. It was based on a European quality of life survey. So they surveyed, 10, 20,000 people about their quality of life. And they found all sorts of things. But one of the things that they found was that a person's quality of life goes up significantly when they are surrounded by enough species of birds. And it goes up more so than in terms of their happiness than income level. So income level will get you some degree of happiness, but being surrounded by birds will get you significantly more happiness. And so It's important for a couple of reasons. Living on Vancouver Island, we're very privileged. I think most people hopefully realize that. One of the things about the Cowichan Valley, or in fact Vancouver Island, is that there's more than 300 species of birds. There's a tremendous variety of birds out there for us to listen to. And the thing about sound, sometimes you don't see those birds. Most of the time you don't see them, but you will hear them if you have normal hearing. And one of the important things that I think is my responsibility is to create awareness of the importance of hearing and the incidence of hearing loss.
Hmm.
When it comes to hearing loss, there's a significant percentage of our population that has hearing loss. Over 10% of the general population and over 40% of the population over the age of 60
Hmm.
has significant hearing loss. And the most common types of hearing loss are high frequency hearing losses. So people with unaddressed high frequency hearing loss will not hear the number of birds that somebody with better hearing will.
Mm-hmm.
And so birds alone are an example of how hearing loss can reduce the quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
So the battle that we're fighting as audiologists is that only 25% of individuals with significant hearing loss actually get their hearing corrected or improved.
Hmm.
There's a big percentage of the population that isn't hearing the birds
Mm-hmm.
and isn't experiencing perhaps the quality of life that our valley and our island offers.
Hmm. And I'm curious from your own personal experience, not knowing the article in depth, what you observe on your clients who show up with hearing loss about how losing their hearing range can affect their sense of happiness or affect their sense of well-being. Like, what's the lived experience of your clients?
hmm You see, it's human nature to adapt. And when hearing loss occurs, it typically occurs very, very slowly over years. And people adapt to their hearing loss by using other abilities, namely their vision and their cognitive ability to piece together the things that they aren't hearing. And when you start to lose bird songs, it's not a black or white thing.
Hmm.
A lot of people with fairly substantial hearing loss will say that they hear the birds, but they don't know what they're missing. So they don't know that they've forgotten that there are a whole bunch of other birds out there. And so a very common comment, amongst other things, of course, birds unfortunately don't land highest on the list in terms of what people realize when they hear better. Of course, they typically are hearing their spouse, their family, the TV, hearing better in difficult listening situations. But a very common comment is, I didn't know that there were so many birds out there. I didn't know that the hummingbird made two different sounds,
Mm.
and so there's this wonderful awareness and discovery of sounds when you can hear better.
Hmm.
And birds are certainly one of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm so curious. Can you walk me through what it is like to reintroduce or to rehabilitate somebody's hearing?
It's a privilege for me to be the person on the end of being able to put a hearing instrument onto somebody and being witness to their discovery of sounds and the improvement of their life.
Mm.
The process, though, has to be done carefully. The hearing loss analogy might be an injury to a body part, let's say an injury to a leg. So imagine if your leg was in a cast. When you take the cast off, you simply don't start running a marathon. You have to strengthen that leg. It's really a rehabilitative process. What happens to an individual is that their brain immediately pays attention, that when something is new, we pay attention to it.
Hmm.
The sound of gravel under our feet, or it could be the birds in their backyard. People often notice the unusual sounds. Our brain has to understand what that new sound is. It has to categorize it as being important or unimportant. And the brain puts into the background what's unimportant and it pays attention to what is important. And that's a process of learning.
Hmm.
It's a wonderful process. Getting a sense back is is really a gift.
Yeah, I think you've really brought an awareness to me. I always just assume someone gets a hearing aid and then all of a sudden they can hear again. And it makes me think that if I'm a new birder, for example, and I start to recognize the sound of a robin, that it's not just whether or not my ears can hear the robin, it's how much am I paying attention to it.
Yes. Another example would be a foreign language. If you are around a foreign language and you don't know the language, you're going to disregard it as noise. You're not going to pay any attention to it. The more knowledge you have about the sound, the more your brain is going to pay attention to it, the more interest you have in it. When we talk about hearing, we can't talk about hearing without talking about brain function.
Mhm.
A lot of the times, people don't understand how important hearing is to proper brain function.
Can you clarify that bit for me when you say that it's critical to proper brain functioning?
When you are having a conversation with somebody, you aren't just hearing them. You're processing what they say. You're putting it into your knowledge of the subject. You're remembering what they say. You're recalling some of the things that you know out of your memory bank. You are drawing analogies. You're thinking ahead. And so there's a whole bunch of cognitive tasks and requirements when we have a conversation beyond just processing sound. And so, because you cannot think about what I'm saying unless you hear it, there's a theory, basically, it's called the limited cognitive resource theory. You have a certain amount of brain power, and you have to put it towards hearing. You have to put it towards connecting the dots and filling in the blanks. Let's say if you have hearing loss. When you do so, there isn't as much left over for doing the other higher order processing cognitive tasks that we need to do. And so I would say that for many people, the cognitive aspect of hearing loss is much more important than not hearing. And I apologize for saying this, but not hearing the birds,
Mhm.
because the literature is showing us that there is an association between hearing loss and cognitive disorder, unaddressed hearing loss.
Wow. So what I understand is because you have hearing loss, you're essentially using that resource. You have a finite amount of resource to put towards cognitive processing.
Yes, you probably wouldn't doing the job that you're doing now without assistance.
Mhm. Yeah, wow. There's another gentleman who I interviewed, Chris Adam. What he describes is having these incredible experiences with nature and with birds, and that they take him back to his childhood. He might hear the cardinal, and it takes him back to a childhood memory of happiness. And I wonder about that connection, about how hearing is not just a moment in time that we hear something, that it is like a muscle memory, or it's something that we can build up soundscapes in our brain. They can have benefit for us in the future. When I hear a certain song, it can take me back to a really beautiful memory. And that in present time, I guess I'm wondering, if we're losing our ability to pick up on sounds, we also in the future lose our ability to go back to memories of good times. Does that make sense? Does that work?
I hadn't really thought about that aspect of hearing
Mhm.
before, so I'd have to think about that. But it does make sense if you don't hear something or you only hear it partially, well, you can't associate a memory to it as well. It does make sense.
Hmm. I wanted to kind of change the subject a little bit and get a sense from you about why it is, from audiologist perspective, we can hear bird songs and we can hear that range. I think you've spoken a little bit about that it's not necessarily a coincidence.
Well, yes, I went to a talk some years ago by an acoustical ecologist, and his thesis was that the most important reason for our hearing is to hear nature sounds. And this acoustical ecologist talked about human evolution and how and why do we have these strange shapes of our ears, of our outer ears and our ear canals? Why are they the length that they are? Why do they amplify those particular frequencies? And his thesis was that when we were roaming the world looking for food as Neanderthals, let's say, birds hold the key to where life is,
Hmm.
where water is, where food is.
Mm-hmm.
And so we evolved, our ears evolved to specifically pick up bird songs.
Hmm.
And so that's why our ear canal resonance is what it is. It's to help us hear the birds. Why do we need to hear the birds? To find food.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that that's a very plausible and interesting explanation of why our ears are shaped the way they are and why our ears have an ear canal resonance of what they have, which tends to be around 3,000 hertz.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other research that talks about how our ability to hear the birds is based on for food, but it's also a sense of safety. That in the same way that hearing, say, a lion roar might, or a bear roar might stimulate your sympathetic nervous system and tell you danger is in the area. But hearing a bird song does the opposite. It stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system and also informs us that it's safe. It's okay to be outside. One of the aspects of learning about bird songs and why they bring us happiness is that certain sounds in terms of bird songs generate a different feeling, kind of not for everyone, because certain people, for example, will hear the sound of a crow and really love them because they happen to have a personal story that connects them or personal meaning behind it. But for the most part, for those of us that hear sounds like crows, it can be quite agitating. And I'm not sure if you can speak specifically to why a crow sound might be more agitating, but could you just describe a little bit about why it is that certain sounds create a different sort of physiological or emotional response or an agitation on us?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I don't have all the answers to it. There are theories as to why that might occur for particular frequencies. So let me just back up and say that, of course, there's many factors that influence how much a sound bothers us or scares us or the feelings inside of us. It's not just our own personality and our history and our experience. It's the loudness of the sound, for example. Of course, loud sounds are going to attract your attention much more. But when it comes to frequency, the example that I can give you is nails against the chalkboard. That sound is for many people, very grating, and it kind of makes you kind of squirm and your back tingle, that it's very annoying. And why is that? It turns out that the frequency of nails against the chalkboard is very close to the average resonant frequency of the human ear canal. And so a loud, annoying sound is made even louder by the physiology of our ears. So now I can't say that specifically about the crow, but that could be at least part of the reason as to why.
Okay, so my very last question, if I can ask you one more. I'm really am curious about this relationship between what we hear and what we're willing to conserve. Do you see there being a responsibility that those of us who can hear, say, the birds, have in advocating for them?
Oh, absolutely. I haven't given it a lot of thought, but one example that comes to mind is going into one of these ancient forests and listening. The sound of a forest, the absence of traffic or other human noises, being able to hear that is really important to being able to appreciate it. It's not just the size of the trees. There are other senses and other things, and all of our senses help us to appreciate the beauty and the value of those kinds of spaces. Those special spaces, those places of wilderness and beauty and those old growth forests, the sound inside of them, the soundscapes around them are very important. And how do we convey that benefit to the general public and the decision makers? It's a really good, fascinating topic. You have to experience it. You have to be there to appreciate it. And I think that getting people out and into those spaces and hearing in those spaces I think, could be possibly quite powerful.
Terrence, thank you so much for this time. I am so grateful for the way that you're able to convey the meaning and the importance behind our ability to hear, and also it opens up way more questions for me about what are the important soundscapes or what are the important sounds out there in the world, and how can we preserve people's hearing so we can hear those soundscapes?
It's been my pleasure, Alicia. I think the topic is fascinating and very relevant. Thanks for having me.
You had a daughter and you bought a